For 300 standard cycles, humanity had been a footnote in the sprawling text of the galactic hegemony. We were the loud, short-lived, emotionally volatile species from the Sol Protectorate, a quaint little reservation on the galaxy's Orion Spur. Our entry into the galactic community hadn't been a grand arrival, but more of a stumbling entrance through a side door. We were discovered, not the discoverers. Our first clumsy warp drives having been detected by a passing Cathar merchant vessel that had mistaken our frantic hailing frequencies for a distress call. The Cathar, a reptilian species whose civilization was old when Earth's continents were still drifting into place, had benevolently guided us into the fold of the hegemony, a gesture that felt less like an invitation and more like a leash. We were given a seat, but no vote. We were granted protection, but no autonomy. Our history, as far as the hegemony was concerned, began the day they found us. We were laborers, mechanics, and auxiliary marines, the working class of the cosmos. Good with our hands and prone to irrational passions, but certainly not the architects of destiny. That role belonged to the elder races, the Cathar, the ethereal Lumina, and the crystalline silicates, who had carved out the galaxy and established a peace so old and so rigid it had the texture of stone. I, however, believed our history was a lie. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and I was a xeno-archivist, a title that sounded far more prestigious than the reality. In practice, I was a glorified dirt sifter, assigned to the most remote and insignificant outpost the hegemony had to offer. Largely because my theories made my superiors uncomfortable, I was stationed on Xylos, a barren, pockmarked moon orbiting a gas giant in a sector so devoid of strategic value that it was primarily used for deep core resource extraction and little else. For years, I had pursued a singular Bosete's obsessive hypothesis that humanity had been to the stars before, not as the fumbling newcomers the hegemony painted us as, but as something else, something older and far more advanced. I called them the architects. I saw their echoes in the impossible geometry of pre-hegemony ruins on a dozen worlds, in the faint, anomalous energy signatures that official surveys always dismissed as stellar phenomena, and in a deep, instinctual feeling that humanity was a giant that had been forced to forget it was ever awake. My peers called me a romantic, a conspiracist. My Cathar supervisor, Overseer Vex, simply called me a nuisance. My chance to prove them all wrong came disguised as a mundane industrial accident. I was overseeing a deep core drilling operation in the southern hemisphere of Xylos, a tedious job that involved calibrating seismic sensors and ensuring the mining consortium didn't violate any of the hegemony's labyrinthine environmental codes. The official geological surveys, conducted centuries ago, had declared Xylos a lump of nickel, iron, and silicate rock, utterly devoid of historical or biological interest. But my own deep resonance scans, conducted with jury-rigged equipment I'd built myself, hinted at something else. They showed minute structural anomalies deep within the moon's core, patterns that were too regular, too symmetrical to be natural formations. Vex had, of course, confiscated my findings and issued a formal reprimand for operating unauthorized equipment. But the drill was already in motion, its tungsten carbide tip grinding its way toward the very anomaly I'd tried to report. On the third cycle of the operation, the drill screamed. It was a sound that cut through the low hum of the station's life support, a high-pitched, metallic shriek of catastrophic failure. Alarms blared across the command center as the main rig shuddered, its massive superstructure groaning under a stress it was never designed to handle. On the central view screen, the drill's telemetry went haywire before flatlining. It had struck something 20 kilometers beneath the surface. something that wasn't rock. The drill, capable of boring through a dwarf star's cooled core, had shattered. Before Vex could bellow the station into lockdown, a pulse of energy erupted from the drill site, and it wasn't an explosion, not a detonation of power, but something quieter, more profound. It was a wave of pure information, a ripple in space-time that the station's standard sensors barely registered as a gravitational hiccup. But my own instruments, networked into a dusty old server in my cramped quarters, went wild. They had caught the pulse, and within its complex waveform was a single, coherent data packet. It was a fractal code, an intricate, looping mathematical sequence that was both infinitely complex and perfectly ordered. It felt less like a random emission and more like a response, as if the drill hadn't just broken against something, but had knocked on a door that had been sealed for an eternity. Overseer Vex was a creature of unflinching bureaucracy. His scales, the color of wet slate, seemed to tighten around his jaw as he addressed the assembled staff. The event was classified as a sublithospheric pressure release, a geological anomaly of unknown origin. The mine was to be permanently sealed. The consortium compensated for their lost equipment, and all personnel were to submit to a Level 3 memory audit to ensure no sensitive data had been compromised. His cold, yellow eyes swept across the room and settled on me for a fraction of a second too long. He knew I wouldn't let this go. He was right. That night, under the dim, artificial light of Xylos's single orbital station, I made my way to the sealed mine. Access was forbidden. The entrance locked down with magnetic seals and guarded by automated sentry drones, but a decade of being relegated to forgotten outposts had taught me the secret language of such places. I knew the maintenance conduits that were never on the official schematics, the service tunnels whose power regulators could be temporarily bypassed with a simple command script. I moved through the guts of the station like a ghost, my small, portable deep scanner clutched in my hand. It was a device of my own design, capable of interpreting the very subspace frequencies the hegemony dismissed as background noise. As I drew closer to the sealed mineshaft, the fractal code I had detected earlier began to sing. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a resonance that vibrated through the metal deck plates and up into my bones. The signal grew stronger, cleaner, and I realized with a jolt that it was changing, subtly adapting its frequency to match my own biosignature. It wasn't just broadcasting, it was listening. It was reacting to me. I finally reached the breach point, a cavernous chamber at the bottom of the main elevator shaft. The air was still and cold. The magnetic seals on the tunnel leading to the shattered drill were active, humming with lethal energy, but I had no intention of going through them. My destination was below. I rappelled down into the raw, unfinished cavern, landing softly on the dusty floor directly above the point of impact. I powered on the deep scanner, its emitter whirred to life, sending a focused beam of resonance waves into the moon's crust. The return signal began to paint a picture on my datapad, and my breath caught in my throat. The object the drill had struck wasn't a boulder or a stray deposit of dense metal. It was the curved edge of a structure so immense it defied comprehension. The scanner's projection struggled to map its full extent, but it was clear that the object made up a significant portion of the moon's total mass. This wasn't a ship buried in the rock. The rock was a thin candy shell wrapped around a gargantuan, silent machine. Xylos wasn't a moon. It was an egg. The fractal code was now a roar in my instruments, a symphony of pure data that seemed to be coalescing around me. I felt a strange sense of familiarity, a dizzying déjà vu, as if I was remembering a song I had never heard. The code was a key, and it was resonating with something inside me, something in my human DNA that had lain dormant for generations. This was the proof I had been searching for, the undeniable evidence of the architects. They hadn't just visited Xylos, they had built it, or hidden it. On a wild, inexplicable impulse, I knelt down and pressed my bare hand against the cold, metallic alloy of the chamber floor, directly over the awakening structure. The moment my skin made contact, a shock wave of silent light erupted from the point of contact, visible only to me. It wasn't a physical force, but a psychic one, a torrent of raw information that bypassed my eyes and ears and poured directly into my consciousness. My mind fractured. I was standing on a ring world that orbited a pair of binary stars, watching silver ships drift between continents of lush, green forests. I was looking through the eyes of a soldier in armor of living metal, holding a weapon that fired collapsed singularities at a fleet of shrieking, biological horrors. I heard a language that felt like it was woven from light and gravity, a language that was the native tongue of my soul. Even as my brain failed to grasp a single word, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it was painful, followed by a wave of loss so absolute it brought me to my knees. It was the collective memory of a lost empire, a history stolen from my species, and it was screaming to be remembered. And then, the moon itself began to scream. A deep, resonant groan echoed up from the core, a sound of ancient machinery stirring from an eon of slumber. The ground beneath me trembled, not with the violent chaos of an earthquake, but with the controlled, deliberate shudder of a machine reconfiguring itself. On the station above, Overseer Vex watched in disbelief as his sensors went from red alert to outright impossibility. Long, hairline cracks, glowing with a soft, blue light, raced across the moon's surface, connecting and forming vast geometric patterns. Entire continents of rock and dust began to shift, retracting inward like the petals of a colossal mechanical flower. The dull, gray shell of Xylos was peeling away, revealing the impossible truth it had concealed for millennia. Beneath the rock was a superstructure of gleaming, black alloy, a lattice of docks, hangars, and city-sized fabrication bays that formed a shipyard of truly godlike scale. And nestled within those docks were the silent silhouettes of thousands of warships, their forms sleek and predatory, unlike anything in the known galaxy. At the very heart of the awakening shipyard, a massive antenna array, kilometers high, unfurled and began to broadcast. It was a powerful vocus signal that washed over the entire sector, ignoring all hegemony frequencies and protocols. It was a signal that carried only a single word, repeated in a language that had not been heard in the galaxy for 100,000 years, but which every human, from the miners on Xylos to the diplomats on the hegemony's capital world, understood on a genetic level. The word was a command, a call to arms, a declaration of rebirth. Awake. The lie was broken. The footnote of galactic history was about to write a new chapter, and I, Eris Thorn, was standing on the very first page. The psychic shockwave had subsided, but the physical one was just beginning, standing in the cavern deep within the moon's crust. I felt the groan of awakening in the soles of my feet, a vibration so low and powerful it felt like the birth of a world. Above, the single orbital station, Xylos Outpost 7, was a hive of frantic activity. On my stolen datapad, I could see the station's internal comms log scrolling in a chaotic cascade of panicked messages. Overseer Vex's clipped, guttural commands were being drowned out by the sheer, overwhelming impossibility of the sensor readings. The moon was not a moon. The geological surveys were not just wrong, they were a lie on a planetary scale. See, the rock was a shroud, a camouflage of cosmic proportions, and it was now sloughing off like dead skin. I watched, mesmerized, as the image from an external drone feed showed the surface of Xylos cracking apart. It wasn't the chaotic shattering of an explosion, but a controlled, geometric deconstruction. Massive plates of silicate and nickel iron, some the size of continents, unlocked from one another and began to retract into the moon's interior, sliding away with a silent, inexorable grace. In their place, a structure of impossible scale was revealed. It was a latticework of a dark, non-reflective alloy, a material that seemed to drink the light of the distant star. Vast, city-sized bays, orbital docks that could swallow capital ships whole, and spires that climbed for dozens of kilometers from the surface were emerging from the dust. Xylos was a shipyard, a fortress, an artifact of an age so far beyond the hegemony's comprehension that it might as well have been magic. And its heart was beginning to beat, and the signal that had broadcast the single word "awake" was not merely a radio transmission. It was a resonant frequency tuned to the very helix of human DNA. On Outpost 7, every human felt it. The miners, the engineers, the botanists in the small hydroponics bay, they all stopped. It was a collective pause, a moment of shared, inexplicable memory. They looked up from their consoles, their tools falling from their hands, their eyes unfocused as a ghost of a forgotten identity whispered in their blood. I felt it too, but for me, it wasn't a whisper. It was a conversation. The mind of the shipyard, the vast intelligence I had touched, was now using me as its focal point, a conduit between an ancient, sleeping empire and its scattered, forgetful children. Fragments of purpose flooded my mind. The shipyard was named Ethelberg, the citadel of the dawn. Oh yeah. It was one of 12 such deep-core installations, the final redoubts of a civilization that had called itself the Terran Imperium. They had not been conquered. They had been erased. A weapon had been used against them, not of energy or matter, but of information, a psychomimetic virus that had severed their connection to their own technology, their history, their very identity, leaving them adrift in a sea of galactic amnesia. The hegemony hadn't discovered humanity. They had found the dazed, confused survivors stumbling in the ruins of their own forgotten greatness and had written a new, simpler history for them. We were not a new species on the galactic stage. We were a fallen one, and Ethelberg was the first key to our restoration. Overseer Vex, to his credit, did not descend into pure panic. His Cathar mind, honed by centuries of rigid protocol, struggled to place the event into a recognizable box. He settled on unidentified hostile emergence. Within minutes, he had transmitted a Priority 1 distress call to the sector fleet. His report, a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement that described a significant geological event resulting in the exposure of a non-hegemony military installation of considerable size. The response was swift. A hegemony battle group, the 3rd Pacification Fleet, was diverted from its patrol route and was now burning a hole through subspace toward our sector. They would arrive in less than a cycle. As Vex attempted to impose martial law on the station, he found his authority crumbling. The human crew, once docile and compliant, were now different. There was a quiet confidence in their eyes, a sense of shared purpose that Vex's threats and regulations could not penetrate. They moved with an eerie efficiency, securing the station, rerouting power, but not under his orders. They were listening to a different command, the silent one humming from the awakened moon below. My datapad chimed. It was a direct, encrypted message from the station's chief engineer, a woman named Lena Rask. Thorn. What the hell is going on? My people are acting like they're part of a hive mind. And every diagnostic I run on this station's comms is picking up a signal that looks like a ghost in the machine. It's coming from the moon. You're down there. You know something? I guided her through a secure back channel, one I had used for my illicit research for years. It's us. Lena. I transmitted back, my fingers trembling slightly. It's all us. We've been lied to. We're not who they told us we were. I sent her the data packet I had captured. The pure fractal code. Her reply came a moment later. My God, it's beautiful. It feels like I've known this my whole life. The connection was made. She was the first. The hegemony fleet arrived like a mailed fist. 20 cruisers, sleek, blade-like vessels of Cathar design, exited subspace in a ripple of distorted space-time, their weapon ports glowing with contained energy. They formed a blockade around Xylos, a ring of steel and arrogance. The fleet's flagship, the indomitable Will, broadcast a system-wide ultimatum. This is Admiral Krav of the Hegemony 3rd Pacification Fleet. The unidentified installation is in violation of the Galactic Armistice Accords. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will be met with overwhelming force. I watched the transmission on my data pad from the cavern, which was now bathed in the soft ice blue internal light of Ethelberg itself. The shipyard's intelligence, the Nexus, it called itself in my mind, showed me the fleet not as my eyes would see it, but as it did. It saw the energy signatures of their reactors, the frequencies of their shields, the minute stress fractures in their hull plating. It saw them as a child sees a collection of poorly made toys. They are afraid. The Nexus communicated to me, its voice a flow of pure understanding. Their peace is a cage built of forgetting. We are the memory they tried to kill. They're going to fire on us. I subvocalized, my heart hammering in my chest. They will attempt to. It will be instructive for them. The Nexus's calm was unnerving. It was the calm of absolute certainty. On the bridge of the indomitable Will, Admiral Krav, a grizzled Cathar veteran with scales as scarred as his ship's hull, sneered at the silent moon. It had not responded to his hails. It had not powered down. It simply existed, a silent rebuke to his authority. Fire a warning shot, he commanded. A single plasma torpedo. Detonate it 1,000 kilometers from the surface. Let them see what we are capable of. A brilliant streak of white-hot energy launched from the flagship, a miniature sun screaming across the void. It was halfway to its destination when Ethelberg responded. It didn't fire a laser, and it didn't launch a missile. It simply flexed. Across the surface of the shipyard, thousands of previously invisible emitters pulsed in perfect unison, releasing a wave of pure gravitational distortion. It was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The plasma torpedo did not explode. Its trajectory was bent, twisted back on itself in an impossible arc. It flew back toward the Hegemony fleet, not as a weapon, but as a returned message. The torpedo, still armed, was gently guided into a stable orbit around the indomitable Will, circling the flagship like a new, tiny, and very angry moon. The bridge of Krav's ship was silent. Every officer, every technician stared at their screens in stunned disbelief. They had just witnessed a violation of every known law of physics. A gravitational field of that strength and precision was theoretically impossible. It would require more energy than their entire fleet could generate in a century, all focused with an accuracy that was beyond their comprehension. They are beginning to understand. The Nexus whispered in my mind. On Outpost 7, Lena Rask had managed to rally the entire human contingent. They had barricaded the command center, locking Vex and his few Cathar officers out. They weren't rioting, they were preparing. With Lena's guidance, they began patching the station systems directly into Ethelberg's local network, which had opened itself to them like a welcoming hand. The station was being integrated, becoming the first modern piece of a puzzle that had been shattered for millennia. Admiral Krav was a creature of pride, and his pride had been wounded. He couldn't comprehend what he was seeing, so he chose to dismiss it as a trick, a light show. "Open a channel to that thing," he snarled. "Inform them that their parlor tricks are unimpressive. Their next act of defiance will be their last." A channel opened, but the voice that answered was not from the moon. It was from me. My face, grimy and pale, appeared on the main view screen of the indomitable Will. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne, speaking for Ethelberg," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, amplified by the Nexus's calm resolve. "You are trespassing in sovereign Terran Imperium space. Your warning shot has been noted. You will power down your weapons and withdraw your fleet, or we will disarm you." Krav's eyes widened, first in shock at seeing a human, then in rage. A human, a primitive, emotional, working-class creature was speaking to him from the heart of this impossible machine. "The Terran Imperium is a myth, a children's story," he roared. "You are nothing but scavengers in a tomb you do not understand. You have one chance to surrender." He is ready for his lesson, the Nexus conveyed. Ethelberg acted again. The gravity wave pulsed a second time, wider, more encompassing. Across the hegemony fleet, every weapon system, every torpedo tube, every plasma cannon was gently but irresistibly wrenched from its housing and pulled out into space. The ships were not damaged, the crews unharmed, but they were now toothless. 20 cruisers, a symbol of hegemony power, now drifted impotently in the void, surrounded by a cloud of their own useless weaponry. The silence that followed was absolute. Krav stared at his tactical display, which showed his fleet's status as unarmed. The word seemed insufficient for the reality of their humiliation. And then, from the largest hangar bay on Ethelberg, a single ship emerged. It was small by the shipyard standards, a scout vessel no larger than a hegemony frigate, but its design was a thing of lethal beauty. It was all sharp angles and dark, shifting alloy, and it moved without any visible means of propulsion. It drifted to a stop before the indomitable Will, its cockpit canopy shimmering with a golden light. A new voice, clear and strong, broadcast on the channel Krav had opened. It was Lena Rask's. "Admiral Krav," she said, her voice laced with the ice of newfound authority. "Dr. Thorne has just been named provisional governor of the Ethelberg sector as his first official act. He has declared this system off-limits to all hegemony military forces. You may collect your weapons on your way out." The age of the footnote was over. The story of humanity was beginning again. The Third Pacification Fleet did not, in fact, collect their weapons on the way out. They simply left. 20 warships, stripped of their pride and their armaments, in a display of power so elegant it was insulting, turned and fled into the cold depths of subspace, carrying with them a message more potent than any formal declaration of war. Humanity was not what they seemed. On the bridge of Lena Rask's scout ship, the echo of Sol, I watched the last of the hegemony warp signatures fade from the tactical display. The small vessel was an extension of Ethelberg itself, its controls responding to thought as much as touch, the air inside humming with a quiet, living energy. Lena sat in the pilot's chair, her knuckles white where she gripped the controls, a look of fierce, incredulous joy on her face. "Did that just happen?" she breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "We just stared down a hegemony battle group and sent them running with their tails between their legs." I managed a weak smile, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly giving way to the crushing weight of what we had just unleashed. "We didn't just stare them down. Lena, we declared our independence. We drew a line in the sand of stars and told the most powerful empire in the galaxy they were no longer welcome. Provisional Governor." The title felt absurd, a costume I was ill-suited to wear. I was a xeno-archivist, a man more comfortable with dusty relics than with the birth of a new political entity. But the nexus, the silent, omnipresent mind of Ethelberg, had been clear. The fractal code had resonated most strongly with me. The first contact had been mine. The responsibility, therefore, was also mine, at least for now. Our first task was to understand what we had inherited. With the Outpost 7 now fully integrated into the shipyard's network, its crew of 300 humans became the first citizens of this new nascent power. They were no longer miners and engineers. They were explorers, pioneers in their own forgotten history. Under my direction, with the Nexus as our guide, we began the monumental task of exploring Ethelberg. The scale of it was simply staggering. The shipyard was a self-contained world, a sphere of engineering that dwarfed any single creation of the hegemony. Automated fabrication bays, dormant for 100,000 years, flickered back to life. Their nano forges capable of constructing anything, from a simple power conduit to the hull of a dreadnought, atom by atom. The Nexus showed us the archives, vast data vaults stored in crystalline memory banks that held the entirety of the Terran Imperium's knowledge. We saw the schematics for technologies that the hegemony considered impossible stable wormhole generators, reality anchors that could shield a system from subspace fluctuations, and weapons that manipulated the fundamental constants of the universe. It was the legacy of a Type 3 civilization, a power that had harnessed the energy of its entire galaxy. And we were its sole, bewildered heirs. But the archives also held a warning: the psycho-mimetic virus, the weapon that had brought the Imperium to its knees, was codenamed Lethe, the River of Forgetfulness. It hadn't just erased memories, it had rewritten human neurology on a fundamental level, severing the innate psychic link that had allowed the Imperium to interface with its advanced technology. The reason the fractal code had resonated with us, the reason the echo of Saul responded to our thoughts, was because the crew of Outpost 7 represented a statistical anomaly. Generations of living in deep space, exposed to the strange radiation of the Orion Spur, had caused a slight but significant genetic drift. The chains of Lethe were weaker in us. We were, in a very real sense, the first generation of a new humanity, one that was slowly, painfully beginning to remember. The Nexus also revealed the shipyard's primary function. Ethelberg was not just a fortress, it was a cradle. Deep within its core were the gene banks, a repository containing the genetic codes of every man, woman, and child of the old Imperium, preserved in stasis. The shipyard's ultimate purpose was not to wage war, but to rebuild a fallen people. This revelation shifted our perspective entirely. We were not just rebels, we were custodians. We were the guardians of a second chance for our entire species. The news of the Xylos incident, as the hegemony was now calling it, spread through the galactic networks like a shockwave. The official narrative from the Hegemony High Council was one of cautious containment. A previously unknown, pre-hegemony sentient construct had been activated and had displayed unprovoked aggression. They omitted the part about their fleet being disarmed without a single casualty. But the truth, as it so often does, found a way to leak out. Smuggled data logs from the Third Fleet, sold on black market data hubs, painted a very different picture. Whispers of a lost human empire began to circulate, at first dismissed as fringe conspiracy, but then, as more evidence trickled in, gaining a terrifying traction. Across the hegemony, humanity's position began to shift. The 2 billion humans scattered across 100 worlds, once seen as a docile, if somewhat unruly, labor force, were now viewed with suspicion and fear. Hegemony security forces began cracking down on human populations, imposing curfews, restricting travel, and conducting loyalty audits. They were trying to put the genie back in the bottle, but it was already out, and it was beginning to remember its own power. We received our first message from the outside a week after the fleet's departure. It was a tightly encrypted signal, bounced through a dozen defunct satellites to mask its origin. When Lena decrypted it, the face of a human man, his features etched with stress and exhaustion, appeared on our main screen. "This is Captain Eva Rostova of the Free Trader Odyssey," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "We've been monitoring the chatter. Is it true what they're saying about Xylos about us?" I stepped forward. "It's true," I confirmed. "We've found our history. We've found a home." Rostova's face broke with a relief so profound it was heartbreaking. "Thank God we're not alone. We're a convoy of about 50,000, mostly families, miners from the Triton sector. The Cathar have locked down our system. They're rounding people up. We managed to break the blockade, but we're running on fumes. And they're hunting us. We need a safe harbor. We need Ethelberg." This was the moment the theoretical became real. We were no longer just a curiosity. We were a beacon. I looked at Lena, at the faces of the other senior crew members on the bridge. I saw the same thought reflected in their eyes. We had no choice. "Give us your coordinates, Captain," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "We're coming to get you." The mission was a risk. Ethelberg itself was immobile, its systems still in the process of a full awakening. But the Nexus had already brought 3 more ships online, sister vessels to the Echo of Sol. They were scouts, designed for speed and stealth, armed with the same gravity distortion technology that had so humiliated Admiral Krav. We would be a small, fast-moving extraction force. The plan was simple: use Ethelberg's nascent wormhole generator to open a temporary rift near the Triton sector, jump in, retrieve the convoy, and jump back before the local hegemony forces could react. It was a surgical strike, a test of our new capabilities and our new resolve. As our small flotilla of 4 ships prepared to depart, the Nexus gave me another piece of the puzzle. It showed me a map of the galaxy, not as the hegemony saw it, with its neat sectors and established trade routes, but as the Imperium had. It was a web of hidden pathways, of dormant wormhole conduits, and at its center were 12 glowing points of light, the 12 citadels. Ethelberg was not alone. Its awakening had sent a silent, subspace pulse to its siblings, a signal that would take years to reach some of them. But the call had been made. We were not just one awakened fortress. We were the beginning of a galactic immune response. Our 4 ships, the Echo of Sol, the Stardust Pilgrim, the Silent Blade, and the Memory of Terra, gathered before the shimmering, unstable mouth of the wormhole, the portal, a tear in the fabric of reality held open by the focused will of Ethelberg, swirled with the colors of 1,000 nebulas. Lena, commanding the small fleet from the Echo, gave the order. All ships, execute jump on my mark. For the Imperium. It was the first time any of us had said the words aloud. They felt strange and powerful, a claim to a legacy we were only just beginning to comprehend. One by one, our ships plunged into the wormhole, leaving the silent, watchful eye of Ethelberg behind. We were no longer just archivists and engineers. We were soldiers in a war we hadn't started, fighting for a future we couldn't yet imagine, all in the name of a past that had been stolen from us. We were the children of the architects, and we were going to bring our people home. The journey through the wormhole was a disorienting, breathtaking ordeal. It wasn't the gut-wrenching lurch of hegemony subspace travel, a brute force method of punching a hole in reality. This was a gentler, more profound form of transit. The universe outside our viewports dissolved into a river of liquid starlight, a silent, flowing current of pure space-time. The Nexus guided us, its presence a calm, steadying thought in the back of our minds, ensuring the unstable corridor held its shape. We were a mayfly riding on the back of a god. We emerged into the Triton sector like ghosts, the wormhole collapsing behind us with a silent implosion of light. The contrast was jarring. We had left the quiet majesty of Ethelberg and plunged into a system teetering on the edge of open conflict. The sector was a haze of stellar dust and asteroid fields, home to a network of mining colonies that had been worked by human labor for generations. Now, it was a cage. Hegemony cruisers, their forms stark and predatory against the faint glow of the sector's red dwarf star, patrolled the system's edge, their blockade tight and merciless. Lena's voice crackled over the flotilla's encrypted comms. Tactical is online. I'm picking up the convoy's distress beacon, bearing 274 deep in the asteroid belt. They're hiding, but I'm also tracking 2 hegemony destroyers closing on their position. ETA to intercept is less than 20 minutes. There was no time for a protracted, stealthy approach. The lives of 50,000 people were on the line. Lena, I said, my voice tight, can we disarm those destroyers like we did the fleet at Ethelberg? A moment of silence as she and the Nexus conferred. Negative, Governor, she replied, the formal title still sounding foreign to my ears. The gravity emitters on these scout ships are precise, but they lack the raw power to strip a warship at range. We'd have to get dangerously close. The Nexus suggests an alternative misdirection. The plan the Nexus proposed was audacious, elegant, and terrifying. It involved using our gravity emitters not as a weapon, but as a tool for manipulating the environment. We would become shepherds of chaos. The 4 ships broke formation. The echo of Saul and the Stardust Pilgrim made a burn for the convoy's location, their engines running silent, their hulls coated in a light-bending field that made them all but invisible against the backdrop of space. The Silent Blade and the Memory of Terra, meanwhile, headed in the opposite direction, toward the densest part of the asteroid field. Their mission was to make a very big noise. From the bridge of the Echo, I watched on the tactical display as the 2 ships reached their designated coordinates. Then, they pulsed their gravity emitters in a complex, synchronized sequence. It was like striking a cosmic tuning fork. The delicate gravitational balance of the asteroid field shattered. Rocks the size of small moons, previously locked in stable orbits for millions of years, were nudged into new, chaotic trajectories. A storm of rock and ice, a localized, man-made cataclysm, began to form, hurtling directly toward the hegemony patrol route. The 2 destroyers, their sensors suddenly screaming with 1,000 proximity alerts. were forced to break off their pursuit of the convoy. Their hunt for refugees was instantly forgotten in a desperate fight for their own survival as they swerved and fired their point defense cannons, trying to carve a path through the sudden, impossible avalanche of rock. "The cavalry has arrived," Lena murmured, a grim smile on her face. "Rostova, this is Lena Rask of the Terran Imperium Command. We are on approach. Prepare your convoy for immediate extraction." The reply from the freighter captain was choked with emotion. "Imperium Command, we thought we were the last. We're reading you. By the stars. You're a beautiful sight." The convoy was a ragtag collection of vessels, hulking ore haulers, small passenger shuttles, and modified mining barges. They were huddled together in the shadow of a massive, pockmarked asteroid, their hulls scarred from their escape, their energy signatures faint and flickering. As we approached, they began to emerge from their hiding place, their running lights blinking on like fireflies in the dark. The sight was both pathetic and profoundly moving. These were our people, the first of our scattered species to answer the call home. But our window of opportunity was closing. The hegemony destroyers, having weathered the worst of the asteroid storm, were already re-establishing their patrol vectors. More than that, Lena's long-range sensors picked up new warp signatures. The hegemony was sending reinforcements, and they wouldn't be fooled by the same trick twice. "Governor!" The Nexus's voice flowed into my mind, calm as ever. "The wormhole can be re-established for a duration of 94 seconds. The convoy must be ready to transit the moment it opens." I relayed the message to Rostova. "Captain, you have 90 seconds to get your entire convoy through the gate. There won't be a second chance." "We'll be ready," he replied, his voice firm. "Just get us out of this hell." Silent Blade and the Memory of Terra rejoined us, forming a protective V formation around the vulnerable civilian ships. We were a shield, a tiny island of forgotten power against a rising tide of hegemony steel. Then the wormhole opened. Ethelberg, light years away, reached across the void and tore a hole in reality right in front of us. It was a swirling vortex of impossible color, a gateway to sanctuary. "All civilian vessels, go, go, go," Rostova commanded, and the convoy surged forward, a desperate, clumsy stampede toward salvation. The ore haulers, slow and ponderous, went first, their massive frames filling the aperture of the wormhole. Shuttles and barges followed in their wake, a chaotic stream of metal and hope. We watched the timer on our tactical display tick down. 60 seconds. 40 seconds. The last of the civilian ships, Rostova's own freighter, the Odyssey, plunged into the vortex. The hegemony reinforcements arrived at that exact moment. 3 more destroyers and a heavy cruiser beside the hegemon's fist dropped out of subspace, their weapons already glowing hot. They were too late to stop the convoy, but we were still in their sights. "Lena, get our ships through," I ordered. "That's an order. And we're not leaving you behind," she shot back, her ship holding its position between me and the enemy. "Nexus, can Ethelberg sustain the gate for another 10 seconds? "Affirmative," the Nexus replied. "But structural integrity will be compromised. The risk is significant." "Do it," I commanded. The Stardust Pilgrim and the Memory of Terra dove into the wormhole. The Hegemony fleet opened fire, a storm of plasma and laser fire erupting across the void. The Silent Blade, the last in line, took a glancing hit, its shields flaring violently as it slipped through the gate just as the enemy fire found its mark. Lena and I were the last ones left. "Our turn," she said, her hands flying across the controls as she piloted the Echo toward the shimmering, now wavering portal. We were meters from the entrance when the hegemon's fist fired its main cannon. It wasn't a plasma bolt. It was a kinetic slug. A massive rod of hyperdense tungsten fired at a fraction of the speed of light. It was a crude, brutal weapon, but incredibly effective. It slammed into the wormhole's event horizon. The effect was catastrophic. The portal, already unstable, shattered. The doorway to Ethelberg didn't close. It exploded. Our ship was thrown backward by the shockwave, our system screaming in protest. The view screen cleared to show a scene of utter devastation. The space where the wormhole had been was now a swirling chaos of raw energy, a temporary nebula of exotic particles that would dissipate in a few hours. The hegemony fleet, caught in the blast, was in disarray, their shields overloaded, their systems fried by the burst of pure space-time energy. But we were alive, and we were trapped. We were 400 light-years from Ethelberg, with no way back. Our small ship was alone, deep in enemy territory, with a very angry hegemony battle group slowly recovering its senses. "Well," Lena said, her voice unnervingly calm as she ran a diagnostic on our damaged systems. "That could have gone better." Before I could respond, the Nexus spoke in my mind, its voice for the first time laced with something that felt like urgency. "Governor Thorne, the wormhole collapse had an unintended consequence. It created a subspace echo, a resonance wave that has propagated through the old Imperium network. The other citadels, Sci-Fi, they have heard us. They are waking up." On our long-range display, a new symbol flared to life. It was a distress call, but not a hegemony one. It was an ancient Terran signal, broadcast from a nearby system that was, according to all hegemony charts, completely empty. The signal was a simple, repeating message: Citadel Valerius is under siege. Imperium forces requesting immediate assistance. The archives must be protected. The lethe must not spread. We had saved 50,000 souls, only to discover that a far greater battle was already underway. We were cut off, alone, and the last remnants of our ancient civilization were crying out for help. The choice was simple. We couldn't go home. We would go to war. The distress call from Valerius was a ghost's cry across a dead network, a signal that should not have existed broadcast from a place that was not supposed to be there. The Cygnus X1 sector, according to hegemony star charts, was a navigational hazard, a region of intense gravitational shear and stellar radiation surrounding a massive black hole. It was a place ships went around, not through. Yet, deep within that chaotic maelstrom, a sister citadel was not only awake but under attack. The choice was not a choice at all. It was a duty. Our small, battered scout ship, the Echo of Sol, was a single spark against a sea of oncoming darkness. But we were all that was left. Lena, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her console, managed to coax the ship's damaged systems back to a semblance of order. Our main drive was functional. Our stealth systems were at 50%, but the gravity emitters were offline. We were a blade that had lost its edge. "We can't fight them," Lena stated, her voice flat and pragmatic. "Not in a straight-up confrontation. 4 destroyers and a heavy cruiser, they'll swat us like a fly." "We won't fight them," I replied, my mind racing. The calm of the Nexus, a reassuring presence amidst the chaos of my own thoughts. "We'll outrun them. Valerius is in the Cygnus sector. They won't follow us in there." Their ships aren't shielded for that kind of environment. It was a desperate gamble. We would be flying blind, relying on the ancient, instinctual knowledge of the Nexus to guide us through a region of space that would tear a hegemony vessel apart. The hegemony fleet, recovering from the wormhole's explosive collapse, began to reform its battle lines. They hadn't pinpointed our exact location yet, but it was only a matter of time. Lena engaged the main drive, and the echo of Saul surged forward, a silent shadow accelerating toward the ominous, swirling blackness of the Cygnus Nebula. The journey was a descent into a beautiful, lethal hell. We navigated through fields of superheated plasma, their tendrils of incandescent gas licking at our shields. We dodged rogue planetoids caught in the black hole's gravitational dance, their orbits chaotic and unpredictable. The ship groaned and shuddered around us, a constant, nerve-wracking symphony of a machine pushed to its absolute limits. But the Nexus was a perfect navigator. It saw the invisible currents of gravity, the shifting tides of radiation, and guided us through the chaos with a grace that felt almost supernatural. As we plunged deeper into the sector, the distress call from Valerius grew stronger, clearer. It was no longer just a repeating signal, it was a live data stream, a torrent of information that painted a grim picture. Valerius was not a shipyard like Ethelberg. It was a fortress of knowledge, an Orcs, a citadel dedicated to preserving the Imperium's archives. And its attackers were not the hegemony. The ships swarming Valerius were biological, not mechanical. They were vast, chitinous creatures, living vessels that moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. They were the stuff of nightmares, the very same horrors I had seen in the fleeting visions given to me by Ethelberg. The Nexus gave them a name, the Scourge. They were the reason the Lethe virus had been created. The old Imperium hadn't fallen to the hegemony's ancestors. The hegemony was a footnote, a group of scavengers who had simply moved into the ruins. The true war, the Great War, had been against this biological plague, a hive-mind intelligence that consumed entire civilizations. The Lethe virus hadn't been a weapon used against the Imperium. It had been a last, desperate act of self-sacrifice. The Imperium had erased its own memory, severed its connection to its godlike technologies, and scattered its people into primitive ignorance to starve the Scourge of its primary food source, sentient psychic energy. They had burned their own fields to stop the blight from spreading. Now, the blight was back. Valerius was the last library of a forgotten age, and the Scourge was trying to burn it. We emerged from the nebula into a scene of apocalyptic grandeur. Valerius was a crystalline sphere, a moon-sized structure of interlocking facets that glowed with a soft, internal light. It was currently besieged by hundreds of Scourge vessels, their dark, organic forms swarming around the citadel like wasps around a fallen fruit. Explosions of blue and gold energy. The citadel's automated defenses blossomed silently in the void. But for every Scourge ship vaporized, 2 more took its place. "My God," Lena whispered, her hands tightening on the controls. "We're too late." Negative, the Nexus stated, its calm unwavering. "The archives are in the Citadel's core, protected by a temporal stasis field. The outer layers are being sacrificed to buy time, but that time is running out. We must reach the core and reactivate the Citadel's primary defense, the Song of Oblivion." The Song of Oblivion. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine. The Nexus explained. It was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a resonant frequency, a wave of pure psychic energy tuned to disrupt the Scourge's hive mind, effectively deafening them, scattering their consciousness, and rendering them inert. But to activate it, someone with a nascent psychic connection, someone like me, had to physically interface with the Citadel's core. Our mission was no longer one of rescue. It was a suicide run. We had to break through the Scourge fleet, land on the citadel, and get me to the core, all before the fortress was completely overwhelmed. Lena took a deep breath. "Well," she said, a flicker of that grim, defiant smile returning to her face. "At least it's not boring." She angled the Echo toward the besieged citadel. Using the last of our power reserves, she activated our stealth field, and we began to drift through the battle. A tiny, invisible needle in a hurricane of cosmic violence. We slipped past the larger Scourge vessels, their forms monstrous and alien, but the smaller, faster drones were everywhere. One of them, a creature that looked like a shard of obsidian with membranous wings, detected our engine trail. It let out a silent, psychic shriek, and suddenly, a dozen of them broke off from the main assault and swarmed toward us. Our stealth field shattered under their focused psychic assault. Alarms blared across our bridge. "Hold on," Lena yelled, as she threw the ship into a series of impossible evasive maneuvers. We dodged and weaved through the swarm, our point defense lasers firing in desperate, precise bursts. We destroyed 2, then 3, but there were too many. One of them slammed into our port engine, and the ship screamed in protest. We were losing power, losing altitude, spiraling down toward the crystalline surface of Valerius. We crashed. The impact was a brutal, jarring concussion of metal and crystal. We plowed through one of the citadel's outer facets, skidding to a halt in a vast, cathedral-like chamber filled with the silent, glowing pillars of the Archive's data cores. The ship was a wreck, our systems dead, the bridge lit only by the red glow of emergency warnings. But we were inside. I pulled myself from my chair, my body aching. Lena was already at the hatch, a plasma rifle in her hands. "The core," I croaked. "The Nexus will guide us." We ran. The corridors of Valerius were silent, pristine, the air still and cool. It felt like a tomb. But as we descended deeper into the citadel, we began to see the signs of the Scourge's infiltration. Black, viscous tendrils crept along the crystalline walls, and the silence was broken by a faint, chittering sound that seemed to echo in our skulls. We reached the core chamber just as the Scourge did. The chamber was a sphere of pure light, and at its center was a floating, crystalline throne. As I ran toward it, a massive Scourge creature, a walking nightmare of claws and chitin, burst through the far wall. Lena didn't hesitate. She opened fire, her plasma rifle spitting bolts of searing energy that sizzled against the creature's tough hide. "Go!" she screamed, as 2 more Scourge warriors joined the first. "I'll hold them off." I climbed onto the throne. The moment I made contact, the Nexus of Valerius, sister mind to Ethelberg's, flooded my consciousness. It was a mind of pure knowledge, ancient and vast. It showed me what to do. I closed my eyes and reached out with my mind, not with thought, but with feeling, with the memory of a lost empire, the grief of 100,000 years of silence, the defiant hope of a species that refused to be forgotten. I began to sing the song of oblivion. The citadel itself became an instrument. The light in the core pulsed, and a wave of pure, silent energy erupted from Valerius, expanding outward in a perfect sphere. It was a wave of pure psychic static, a sound that could shatter a soul. Outside, the Scourge fleet convulsed. Their hive mind, the very thing that gave them purpose and unity, was shattered, and the smaller drones went inert instantly, drifting like dead insects, and the larger vessels writhed in agony, their biological systems failing as their guiding consciousness dissolved into chaos. Lena, her rifle empty, stood her ground against the 3 warriors as they collapsed to the floor, their bodies twitching and then falling still. The siege was broken. The silence that followed was the most profound I had ever known. We had survived. We had won. But as I sat on the throne, connected to the heart of the Orcs, I saw the full picture. The Scourge was not a random incursion. They had been drawn here. The awakening of Ethelberg, our escape from the Triton sector, it had all been like lighting a flare in a dark, silent forest, attracting the attention of the ancient predators. And Valerius was not the only citadel under attack. Across the galaxy, the dormant fortresses of the Terran Imperium were stirring, and the Scourge, the ancient enemy, was rising to meet them. The hegemony was no longer our primary concern. They were a petty squabble, a footnote in a far older, far more important war. The true war for humanity's survival had just begun again. We were not just fighting for our future, we were fighting to ensure that the entire galaxy had won. And from the scattered remnants of our broken empire, a new imperium, forged not in conquest but in preservation, would rise to meet the tide. Our story was not over. It was just beginning.